What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another album ranking video. Today we are not talking about the Beach Boys. That's right. So after 30 of those videos, 30 long ass videos talking about all the amazing work and shitty work and everything in between that family, that group did over their 60-year career, it has come to a close, and it's finally time to start talking about more genres of music, more artists, and just broaden the taste of this channel a little bit. I think it's well overdue, and mainly with this video, I kind of want to revisit a lot of the artists that influenced me and changed me in my formative musical years, that really gave me a sense of understanding of how music works as an art form, and mainly just influenced me into the person I am today, So, just to end off the entire Beach Boys series, thanks to everybody for watching those, I really appreciate it. But today we're jumping to a band in a genre completely separated from, those West Coast surfing boys, back in the 60s. I mean, one of them surfed, but you know what I'm saying. We're completely jumping ship from 60s pop music to 1980s Floridian death metal. And for those of you who know what I'm talking about, you're going to be very happy with this video. But for those of you who don't, it's time to introduce to you a great, fucking amazing band known as Death. Death was basically the brainchild of mastermind Chuck Schuldiner, formed in 1984 under the name Mantis. He later changed it to Death. And though they went through a million different lineup changes and different members, Chuck Schuldiner was the only key core member, songwriter, and vocalist throughout the entire history of the group. So really it is an analysis of Chuck as a artist and individual and his outlook on the world through his music. So I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I'm really excited to talk about this band. Usually I would have music playing in the background to give it some more atmosphere, but unfortunately I don't today. And I don't feel like going inside to get my speaker and shit to make it play because I'm already all like situated for this review. So we're just going to go with the silence in the background. Hope that's alright, but if you guys miss the audio, next couple reviews and whatever, I'll have it back. So anyway, Death. Fucking awesome band. I guess I don't want to drag out this intro any longer. So they had 7 records, 7 fucking great records. And let me preface that they're one of the very few bands and artists in history and musical history that never released a bad record, There's so many groups out there who've done so many amazing things, but it's very obvious when someone loses their touch of their music or just are trying to be too commercial or whatever it is, Nobody's perfect, and it's a very human thing to change up your sound or misstep in your artistic career or whatever it is. It's a very normal thing, but it's actually very unusual for the opposite to occur, where a band's entire recorded catalog to be fucking awesome. And I think that's what's really cool about this specific review and this specific video, is that Death is a special ass band that came into my life at a special time. I was about 13 years old. I think I just turned 13. My previous obsession before I discovered Death was Green Day. They had got me into music. I was just in love with everything they did. But I guess when you're entering your teenage years, you start changing. You just want to do more, do different things, be into different things, be cooler, whatever shit is like that. And I don't know why specifically they caught my ears and my eyes more than any other group, but I stumbled upon their song Lack of Comprehension one day, and it just blew me the fuck away. I was sitting in science class in 8th grade? It was 8th grade. Yeah, it was a really good day, man. And I just remember hearing the intro, and then the fucking instruments came in with the vocals, and I was like, what the fuck is this? So pretty much from that day forward, late 2017, metal music overtook my life for a good couple years, and it definitely influenced me and changed my mind as a practicing musician to an extent that I cannot understate. This band and this genre of music really changed my life. So for those metalheads who are watching this video, you can completely understand and relate to me that this genre of music is fucking awesome. Just like punk rock, or just like, pretty much any other genre of heavy, energetic music. The community is very tight. grouped together. It's a very communal type of thing, and especially in that era of death metal and music and extreme music, metal music in general, it was a very community-based genre. And Death took their start through the tape trading scene in Florida in the 1980s, from like 84 to 86. They made quite a few demos. They had like a Mutilation demo, Reign of Terror demo, Death by Metal. They had quite a few demos that I won't get into, just the studio albums, but basically culminated in 1986 when Chuck Schuldiner and then drummer Chris Reifert, who actually went on to form Autopsy, but those two, that was the incarnation of Death at the time. They got a record deal from Combat Records, who was like, alright guys, let's do a fucking record. So, without any further ado, number 7 out of 7, their least good album in my opinion, but still a brilliant fucking game-changing record that changed the entire musical landscape, of extreme music at the time. And it was it was 2 kids recording their very first record, and it's still one of the best fucking albums ever, but it's the worst, so I'm just basically gonna be ranting and raving about how fucking good this band is. Anyway, in last place, it should be obvious what it is, but in my opinion, they only really got better with time, but 7 out of 7 is Scream Bloody Gore. So, as I said, just 2 people on this album. It was just Chuck Schuldiner and Chris Reifert. Chris was on drums. Chuck did everything else himself. They initially recorded it in 1986, but the record label was unhappy with how it came out and everything, so they actually re-recorded it. I don't remember where, but I know that Randy Burns was the producer who had been working with a lot. I think Possessed. He had produced for Possessed, so they really liked the sound he had achieved, so they were more excited to work with him. And what came released, I think it was in March or May of 1987. We got Scream Bloody Gore with one of the coolest fucking album arts I've ever seen in my entire life, painted by Mr. Ed Repka himself, the king of old school album art in extreme metal, thrash and death metal. Dude was awesome. Him and Dan Seagrave were probably the 2 greatest artists of that whole musical scene. Anyway, let me stop rambling about history that a lot of you probably already know, and let me just get into the music on these records. Anyway, Scream Bloody Gore is a fucking classic. When it was released in 1987, the only remotely similar things out at the time were probably, as I said, Possessed's 7 Churches, which they also had their second record, what was it called, Beyond the Unknown, which was it was actually more thrash metal. Their first one had more death metal influences. You had Necrophagia, you had Slayer, Creator, Sodom, you had a lot of extreme bands, but picking this up and just looking at the cover, it's so strikingly different from everything else that was out at the time, absent for the most part, besides the upside down T in the logo. Besides that, the satanic imagery was pretty much absent, replaced for just a complete gory, dark, brutal, and horror movie influenced style of imagery and lyrics and sound. What those 2 teenagers back in 1987 achieved with this record changed the fucking game and influenced countless bands to come. But in my opinion, it is their least best record, just because I think what Chuck Schuldiner did with all the oncoming Death albums and the material he would work on, it just kept advancing upon itself. And that's not to discredit this album at all. For a bunch of, I keep saying that, a bunch of, it was just 2 guys. Just for 2 guys recording their first album ever, they really created something very, very special. And I think even though, you can tell they're younger, it's raw, it's not, a labored over, meticulously crafted, progressive artwork that some of their later records have. You could still feel the passion, and you could feel the anger and just the drive to create something special. And with this record alone, they cemented themselves as legends. Some great songs in here include Zombie Ritual, Infernal Death, Evil Dead, Baptized in Blood. I mean, pretty much every song on this record is great. And I could harp on and on about, how this record changed the game. But for me, it's one I really fucking love. The energy's great. Oh my god, the drums and guitar are just furious. I think this is easily the most, probably most aggressive album they ever made, just in terms of pure, raw passion, and I really respect it for that. But songwriting improved on all the records after this, and without wasting too much time just talking about this one record, I think that's pretty much most of what I have to say about it. So, awesome classic, a great record within the realms of extreme metal that changed the game at the time, and a lot of the bands at the time, Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Obituary, Deicide, a lot of them, they loved this record, and for good reason. So, anyway, that was a lot of talking. 7 out of 7. Last place, we got Scream Bloody Gore, but still a great album. And then in 6th place, we're actually only jumping up 1 year to their second release, Leprosy. So, awesome cover, right? That all the fucking covers this band had are awesome. Really, really cool album cover. Leprosy, we see it, the first major lineup change in Death's career besides like the demo eras. So Chuck was going back to Florida because obviously he lived there. If I didn't mention this already, Scream Bloody Gore was recorded in California. So Chuck was going back to Florida, but Chris Reifert didn't want to go. He wanted to stay where he lived. So Chuck was like, shit, man. So he basically got back some of the old previous Death members. Rick Ross, who had been in the band for a couple years in the early days, he brought back on guitar. And then he brought in Terry Butler on bass and Bill Andrews on drums. Terry Butler didn't actually play bass on this record. He had an anxiety attack, I think, in the studio when they were recording it. So he actually had Chuck do it for him. So he's mentioned on the credits, but didn't actually perform on the album. But yeah, so it's obviously a pretty big change from the first record. You have a group of 4 musicians versus just 1. And then because it was only a year after their debut, the songwriting process, I assume, was probably quite a bit shorter. So you actually had Chuck and Rick Ross, I shouldn't say Rick Ross because I think that's a producer. Rick Ross, I think they actually collaborated on some of the tracks on here, and then one of the tracks was actually completely written by Rick. So there's actually more collaboration than most would think. It still comes through as a mainly Chuck Schuldiner envisioned material, but you get to see how he interacts with the other band members, and I think the result is just basically everything that the debut did great, just up another notch. Definitely not as raw as Scream Bloody Gore, but I think it works in its favor. That production on this record in specific is just crushing. For 1988 especially, getting a death metal record, which was a genre in its very, very, very early days, in its infancy, getting a death metal record to sound like this was a very, unheard of thing. Just a metal record in general. Specifically, death metal was such a new concept that nobody really knew how to produce it, except for the people down at Morrisound Studios, who, including Scott Burns, who are the other dudes? There's quite a few other people that were in Morrisound Studio in Tampa, Florida during that whole era that really helped define the sound of old school death metal. But this was the album that actually was the first to do that. This was the first death metal album, I think, that Morrisound Studios ever recorded and produced before a lot of the other bands I mentioned, Obituary, Pestilence. Pretty much, you can name pretty much almost any old school band from that era, and they recorded at Morrisound in Tampa. It was like the epicenter of death metal at the time. It's funny, talking about these records also makes me want to go off on a tangent about just the history of death metal, but I gotta stay on focus, man. But anyway, Leprosy. Fucking ridiculously good record. As I said, it just took everything from the debut and just a notch up. Chuck's vocals are even more brutal, even bigger. The guitar tone is even, it's less metallic and like twangy almost, and just pure fucking low end, deep chugginess. Chuck does do the bass work, but it's great bass work. And then the drums are different. They're actually much less sloppy than Chris Reifert's, but I also do think they're a lot less energetic, but not in a bad way. I just think they're more fitting for the songs. I think on the first record specifically, it was just all about the energy and the passion. There's some sloppy songs here and there, but on this one, they tighten everything up a lot more. There's only 8 tracks versus the 10, I think, that were on Scream Bloody Gore. So what we get is just an extension lyrically and musically. Just, I think more emphasis is put on the songwriting in this one, especially the lyrics too. The lyrics are still very dark, but I think they're a lot smarter. I think Scream Bloody Gore had a lot more shock factor going on with horror movie themes and guts and gore and all that shit. This one still has a little bit of that, but you also have a lot more, I guess, personal death and gore inspired lyrics. You know, you have standout tracks like Pull the Plug, Left to Die, the title track, Choke on It. You know, obviously still very dark, but I think still moving forward, you know. Chuck was always keen on moving his music forward. He never wanted to rest on an idea too long, and this was just a great progression of it. And pretty much all I can say is just, if you love Scream Bloody Gore, this album does everything but better. Yeah, so that's 6 out of 7. And then on to number 5, the 5th least best Death album is, again, the next record after that one. Their third record is Spiritual Healing, released in 1990. By the way, Leprosy was released in 1988. So, yeah. First two records were a year after each other. They took another year, I think, for touring to write this one. And then when going into the studio, who was it? Rick Ross. I don't know why he was kicked out or left. I don't really know the full reason. But they got James Murphy, who still is, but at the time was a very, very renowned guitarist who was in a lot of different bands. He had his own band, Disincarnate, that formed after this, but he featured on this record to do the lead guitar, or split the lead guitar with Chuck. And along with Chuck's ever-growing musical progression, gives this album a much, much more melodic and, I guess, technical feel to it than the first two. Gone are the gore and, you know, tongue-in-cheek lyrics of the first and second records. I mean, definitely more the first record was more tongue-in-cheek, but just the pure brutal death-killing lyrics of the first two are definitely lightened a lot on here and brings in a lot more real-world horror, real-world suffering, pain, and just scary things. And I think it's fitting for a genre of music like this because, you know, if you're really playing aggressive music, heavy music, and just talking about, like, sunshine and rainbows and women and whatever, normal things, it definitely it would have a different feel to it. And I don't think, you know, gory lyrics are any better or worse than, you know, more philosophical, introspective lyrics. But I think the pairing of the more advanced music along with the more advanced lyrics gave this band just a complete switch up. And while I don't think Spiritual Healing was like their groundbreaking genre change in their catalog, which we'll get to, this was definitely showing the steps to that evolution. This was the beginning of an evolution to something much deeper, much more musically proficient, and something beyond the realms of death metal. I think with this album, Chuck aimed to, I guess, prove himself more as a mind. Before, it was all about the energy and the heaviness and the just the brutal feel of it. But I think with this one, he was like, you know what, I have something to say. I'm very passionate about certain things. So, as I said, a lot of the lyrical subjects on this record take a much deeper, more philosophical meaning. And why I don't put this album higher is because I feel like it had the potential to be even greater. And I think it's a great record. But I think because it's still holding on to some of the more old school death metal cliches, and while not being fully realized on the more progressive and melodic side, it's somewhere in between. You can definitely feel that this record gives you a sense of progression. The sound they were going for was pretty much perfected on the 4 albums after this. So, do I fault it at all for not being a fully, you know, progressive, melodic, you know, later death, brilliant masterpiece? No, I don't fault it at all for that, but, you know, you could definitely see the style changing, and regardless of that, it's still a great record, but I think they did a lot better after this. But in terms of their old school, you know, Old school with the old school bloody logo. This is the best that old school sound of death got. As I said, even though it does feel like a transition, it's still a great fucking record with great music on it. Production is much, much cleaner on this one. You know, Gone is the super, super raw, fast sound and production of Scream Bloody Gore. And also evolved from the more slower, brutal sound. This one's a lot cleaner. It's a lot cleaner, a lot tighter, a lot more focused on audible, clean, clear riffs. With Chuck's voice on this record, in my opinion, is the best his voice ever was. I think the way it was recorded on this record is just perfect. And then in terms of the other members, James Murphy is, as I said, a great guitarist, so he brings amazing solos to this record all throughout. Terry Butler does play bass on this record, so it's his first actual studio appearance and last on a Death album. And then Bill Andrews drumming. Great drummer, fits the record well, but in my opinion, was part of the reason this album was held back from being even better than it could have been, and why the 4 records after this got to be taken to an even greater level is because Chuck started working with much more highly influenced drummers, or highly skilled drummers, I should say, that influenced him to push his music further. On this record, Bill Andrews is a great, solid death metal drummer, but that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't know his work since this album. Honestly, I haven't really looked too much into his career, but I definitely feel a clash between the more melodic progressive elements versus the drum performance, I think, that Bill Andrews gave. And not to fault the record musically at all, but as I said like 5 other times, I'm sorry, man, I'm just repeating myself, but I tend to do that a lot in these reviews. But as I said, it just got taken even further. So in terms of being a good combo, that old school death metal sound with, you know, the classic death metal drums, but with the touch of new things, still a classic record and still a great fucking one, and it definitely the best of the old school death sound. Best songs on here are the title track, Living Monstrosity, Within the Mind's real good. They're pretty much all good, but not as many. You know, besides like the title track, I think that's like the biggest standout highlight on this one. It's great material, but material that was just evolved and pushed to an even further level further on. So anyway, I talked a long time about that one. Number 5 out of 7, Spiritual Healing. All right, and then now we're on pretty much to the latter half of the band's career, everything from 1991 to 1998. There's 4 records that came out. In my opinion, you could kind of rank these interchangeably, but this is just to my own taste what I truly feel. So at number 4 out of 7, I'm going to go with, maybe controversial, it's not higher, but some people have it lower, so this is just my opinion, but Individual Thought Patterns. So this one we're jumping in 1993. For this band's lineup at the time, obviously Chuck was the main man, but he also brought in Gene Hoglan for the first time, who was a member of Dark Angel. But I think Dark Angel had split up, so he's like, "Hey Gene, please play on the album. I need people to work with." And being very inspired by Sean Reiner, who had drummed on Human, the album before this, Gene Hoglan really wanted to step up his own drumming. So he has actually cited multiple times that this was pretty much like his training to becoming a professional musician, you know, like a professional drummer. This was like a very radical lineup, and let me finish saying the rest of the lineup before I talk about the music. So Gene Hoglan on drums, you had Steve DiGiorgio on bass, the fucking goat of extreme metal bass in my opinion. He was on Human as well. Well, Gene Hoglan wasn't on Human, but Steve DiGiorgio was on Human, also on this record, and he actually uses a fretless on this one for the first time. So the first and only Death album to use a fretless bass, which is awesome. And then Andy LaRocque from King Diamond plays the leads on here. So it's a very, very stacked lineup. And, yeah, it's really fucking awesome. Now, number 4 out of 7. You might be wondering why I don't have this any higher. And that's just personally because I feel like the other records that I'm going to put above this one are just that fucking good. This is a masterpiece. I think, you know, the previous 3 records I talked about, Death's first 3 records, are all fucking great. Great classics that influenced the death metal and extreme metal genres, you know. undeniably changed the landscape and, you know, influenced a lot of bands, and are just great records. But I think starting in 1991 to 1998 and including this record, these four are just on a different level of musicality and songwriting and just craft. And, you know, it's a testament to just practice makes perfect. You know, the more you work at something, the more you improve yourself, you can get better work out of yourself. And Chuck knew this, and Chuck had a very, very detailed vision of what he wanted this band to be. And he didn't just want to be associated with the growly dude that, you know, sang about zombies and shit. You know, he wanted to, you know, over his career, improve his guitar playing, and improve his vocals, improve his lyrics, improve the songs. And this was just another record that was really, really advancing that, you know. Even though I'd rank Human higher than this, as you guys will see, you know, it still is a musical advancement. Maybe, in my opinion, the record isn't as cohesive or as consistent as the ones I'm going to put above it. But musically, it's still a brilliant record. And I don't fault anybody for putting this, you know, if you had this as your number 1 or 2, I completely understand it because it's a great record. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I could say about the history of this one. I think just musically it's awesome. Every member does great performances. Chuck's vocals are fucking awesome. His screams on here are awesome. The guitar work is even more technical than it had ever been. The solos are, you know, I'd say even better than they'd ever been. Andy LaRock solos provide great melodic touch. And just really good, really good songs in here. I think this is one of the most diverse Death albums, just in terms of stylistic influences they bring to the table. So, some standout tracks: Overactive Imagination, Trapped in a Corner, The Philosopher, Destiny, which is my favorite on this one, which was their first track to ever use acoustic guitar, which wasn't actually an acoustic guitar. It was a keyboard, but made it sound like an acoustic. Works really well. But yeah, overall, this record is just, it's very, very fucking good. Like, it works really well. My only complaint would be the production. This right here, along with pretty much all the other records I have in this video, are the Relapse reissues. So this is unfortunately the remaster of this album, which sounds like shit. In my opinion, very just loud and compressed and just doesn't work very well, doesn't sit right with me. The original mix is a lot better, but still I think it's very airy. It doesn't have the same like gut depth of a lot of the, you know, pretty much almost all the other Death albums had a very, you know, deep punchy production. This one feels a little lacking. So if I had to make it a little lower for any reason, I think a lot of the charm and actually a lot of the musical ideas, especially the guitar, get lost in this record's production. I think there's a lot of cool riffs all over the songs in this album that I just sometimes wish, I'm like, man, like I wish they could have tightened it up a little bit and cleaned up things here. I know this one I think was also recorded at Morrisound, along with Spiritual Healing, Human, Symbolic, and Sound of Perseverance. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, correct me on that. But I'm pretty sure every album besides Scream Bloody Gore was recorded at Morrisound. But again, I don't remember. You know, I was really the most into this band as a 13, 14-year-old. So I actually just binged all their albums for the first time in a couple years, like this past week for this video, because I just really wanted to get them back in my rotation. Because I already had my ideas of the rankings, but anyway, yeah, I was binging back, and this one there's a lot of great tracks, as I said. Love the synths, love pretty much everything about it besides the production. And if I were to say anything that holds this record back from being any higher, I just think the songs in the top 3 are just better than this one. But this has great fucking songs. The Philosopher is probably one of their biggest songs they ever made. And yeah, it just shows Chuck advancing as a musician, as an artist. So yeah, number 4 is Individual Thought Patterns, 1993. Alright, and then top 3. So these 3, kind of interchangeable for me. Number 1's it's constant, but especially 2 and 3 I can kind of swap. But this is, I'm feeling very confident on my feelings on them, so let's just get right into it. So number 3 out of 7 from 1998, their final record, and maybe most divisive. Some people hate it, some people love it. Personally, I love it. I don't see what there is to hate about it, but The Sound of Perseverance. So this one's interesting in the fact that it was not supposed to be a Death album. Chuck was dissatisfied with just the death metal direction he had been in for the, not 15, about 10 years by the time Symbolic came out. So he actually broke up the band in 1995 and started a new band called Control Denied, which he started writing material for. But I think the contract at, I think it was it Roadrunner? I think it was maybe it was Nuclear Blast. I don't remember. I think this album was initially released on Nuclear Blast, but whatever record label they were signed to at the time of Symbolic being released and after they toured for it, they had one more record, I think, on the contract they had to make. So basically what Chuck did is came with some new material along with some Control Denied material, and he got all new musicians to just come together and record one last final death record. And just to put it plain and simply, this is easily the most advanced and technical and musically proficient version of death that ever existed. This is Chuck at probably his most advanced, besides Control Denied, but because he does do all the vocals on here and Tim Amar does the vocals on the Control Denied album, I gotta say this is really Chuck's final. It was pretty much his ending to death. Who knows if he didn't pass away, if the band would have gotten back together or done more things in the future, but unfortunately he did pass away. So all we really have left is the 7 albums and the legacy that they made in the time they had and the time that Chuck had, and what they achieved in this record with a new lineup, by the way, which I'll list off. It's Chuck. He had, what's his name? Richard Christie on the drums, who was also on the Howard Stern Show a lot. He had Shannon Hamm on the other lead guitar, and then Scott Clendenden as the bass player. And then 2 out of the 3 new members were also in Control Denied. So anyway, this record I think is actually very, very different from the 3 that preceded it. This actually almost feels like a complete departure from everything Death had up until that point. But it also feels like a return to form in terms of the raw aspect of it. As I said, a lot of people don't like this record for, multiple reasons, whether it's Chuck's higher vocals on this album, or the longer songs, or the more frantic, less tight songwriting, which are all fair points to make about the record. Some people can see it, as pros and evolution of the band's style. Some people may see it as the cons. Personally, I think all the changes they made are fucking awesome. If I were to have any complaints with this record that hold it from being number 1 or 2, I do think it drags a little bit. There's only 9 songs. It's 8 originals and then a cover of Judas Priest's Painkiller. So 9 songs, but it is almost an hour long. So compared to all the other records, this is by far the longest. And just by virtue that what was I even saying? I forgot. The fact that the songs are longer on this one, it does, if you aren't in the right mood and you kind of just want fast, like just constant energy, I can understand why somebody would put this lower than the other records. But personally, I just think the musical evolution the band took is just, you can't deny it, man. As I said, it's far and away their most technical and ambitious album they ever made. Richard Christie's drums are fucking wild. I'd honestly say he's even looser and slightly less tight than like Gene Hoglan or Sean Reinert. But not saying he's sloppy, but I just think he does a lot more, and it's more open ending. It's not like as tight with every bit of the guitar. It's kind of more crazy. But I think a reason I really love this record so much is just fucking insanely crazy, man. And as I was saying earlier about the raw aspect, I think this is probably their rawest album since Scream Bloody Gore. I feel like every record, Leprosy onward, was always just trying something different with the production, just keep evolving. And I think pretty much every record, got sounding better, maybe besides individual thought patterns, but even then it was still an advancement in the like arrangements of the songs and playing and everything like that. But yeah, pretty much every record was getting more produced, more to it. But I think this one, they took a very unique direction and kind of just made it more raw. For the majority of the tracks, it's just guitar, bass, drums. You don't really see any synth work on here. You don't have, like a lot of vocal effects or nothing like that. It's just pretty raw, aggressive performances. And I mean, I could say that every Death album is pretty angry, but this one sounds pretty angry to me. the older Chuck got and the longer he was doing things, the higher his voice got. So this album, he sounds like inhuman. It's really crazy. He has a really cool, fucking insanely good high voice on this. Just a high, raspy shriek that I've never heard anything like it. And some standout songs on here are Scavenger of Human Sorrow, Spirit Crusher, Flesh and the Power It Holds, Voice of the Soul, and I think the cover of Painkiller they did is fucking awesome. But yeah, overall, it's a masterpiece. If I had to give a reason to why it's number 3 and not any higher, I think they could have made it like maybe 40-45 minutes, cut a little bit of fat off of it, and it could be just as good. But that being said, I don't think it being an hour negates any of the music, just for my own personal taste, you know. But anyway, yeah, it was the final Death record ever, and it's sad that we never got to see the band do more and Chuck progress further. But to go out on a note like this, you can't really do much better, man. And by the way, this is not the original cover. The original album cover was much different, but for some reason, the Relapse reissues, they decided to get a different guy to do a different artist, which I actually do prefer this new cover, but I do like the old one too. But anyway, rambling about random shit. Number 3 is Sound of Perseverance. Alright, and then on to the top 2. I think, in my personal opinion, along with pretty much the world's consensus on this band's music, these are probably the 2 highest rated albums of theirs on a common basis. And I'm not doing these rankings just because most people have these albums in the top 2. I genuinely believe these 2 records are their best and showcase 2 different versions of the band that perfected what they were trying to do great. One version was a really, really pissed off and angry Chuck wanting to take his music to another level, and another version was a virtuoso trying to get the most perfect blend of sonic elements together. And I think both are very valid, but for my taste, this is just how I'm going to do it. So if my number 2 is your number 1 and your number 1 is my number 2, then, you know, that's a cool thing about this band and just about music in general, is that we all have our opinions, man. And specifically this band's catalog, you could pretty much put any of their albums in any ranking and it'd be just as valid because they're all good. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Number 2 out of 7, released in 1995, their second to last record, which was supposed to be their last, but with the Sound of Perseverance, obviously it wasn't. But yeah, 1995 Symbolic. This is the only one that is not on Relapse. This is the Metal Blade reissue. And I think because Roadrunner Records just doesn't want to give up the rights to this record or whatever, so that's why Relapse can't get it. But anyway, there's so much to say about this record, but also not much at all, because it's such a renowned and well-loved and respected record. But, you know, I think in order to have such a high status in music, you know, you got to go over what makes it great. And for me, I just think this is such a phenomenally well-written record. Death metal or not, this is easily Death's best written record. I think Chuck's best moment as a songwriter and artist. Production-wise, vocally, lyrically, musically, it's perfect. It is a 10 out of 10 perfect record. Gene Hoglan plays the drums on this one. You know, he stayed in the band after Individual Thought Patterns to be on this one. But unfortunately, Steve DiGiorgio couldn't be on it, and then Andy LaRocque couldn't commit full time. So he got, what's his name? Ooh. Kelly Conlon, right? Is that his? No, who's the guitarist on this album? I saw the Death to All tribute band. I cannot remember his name. Actually, you know, it might be on the inner printed sheet, if there is one, for who played. There we go. Bobby Cobley. There we go. Yeah, so it was Kelly Conlon on bass and Bobby Cobley on guitar were the 2 new members, and this is the only album they ever played on for this band. But, yeah, it's just a really fucking great work of art, honestly. I mean, I can't really go too in depth, because when a piece of art is so well perfected and so well done, there's only really so much you could say before anything gets redundant. But yeah, honestly, it's just a really great one. Some highlight songs are the title track, Zero Tolerance, Empty Words, Crystal Mountain, Perennial Quest. Pretty much every song on here. Without Judgment's a favorite of mine. That's one thing about this band, is that they just never missed, dude. They never missed. Every song they ever made was good. You know, and some of their songs aren't as good as some of their other songs, but even Death's worst songs are still the best songs of almost any other death metal band, which is what sets them apart, as they continuously evolved. And with this record, even though it still is death, even though it still is a death metal record, you know, just by virtue of the style of the vocals and things, as I said earlier, this was actually supposed to be their last record. You know, Chuck was pretty much getting done with the whole idea of death metal, and he just didn't want to do it anymore. So he pretty much put his all into the songwriting and recording of this record to have it be their last magnum opus, which didn't end up happening. He fucking wrote another masterpiece after it, but, you know, if this was the last record, it would have been a perfect swan song, and it's not, but it's still a perfect record regardless. So, yeah, overall, just phenomenal production, phenomenal songwriting. The outro of Perennial Quest makes me want to cry. It's just really cool shit, man. I don't know what else to say about it. If you want to hear more about it, just listen to it. And this review has already gone on 40 minutes. I'm sorry for wasting all your time like this, but it's a fucking awesome band. So whatever. Anyway, number 2 out of 7. And finally, the first record I ever heard by this band. In my opinion, the overall best blend of all the elements of music they ever had. Just, to me, the perfect death record with the perfect lineup. Released in 1991, number 1 out of 7 for me personally. And that is Human. Human is my favorite death record by far. And do I think it's as strongly composed as Symbolic? I actually don't. I actually think this record is weaker from a musical standpoint than Symbolic. But for me, the blend of elements that Chuck and the band managed to combine here perfected death metal. To me, this is like the perfect death metal album. With the perfect lineup. You had Chuck, obviously, fronting it, as he did with every other death album, but he, for those of you who don't know, Death was supposed to tour in Europe in 1990 for the Spiritual Healing Tour, but it was really poorly managed according to Chuck, so he didn't want to do it. So the other 3 members were like, what the fuck, man? We still want to do this tour. You know, we have commitments and things. So they actually went to Europe without Chuck, hired 2 new members, and toured as Death, playing the music. So Chuck was super fucking pissed off, fired them from the band, and basically with this record, it's just anger. Just pure fucking anger. And, though... Actually, I think it is their most popular record, so I was going to say something about that, but it actually is. But, yeah, to me, and pretty much at the time, this was like the quintessential death metal album. The one that changed their career forever. And, as I said, with Chuck getting a new lineup and firing the old members and being pissed and angry, he brought on Steve DiGiorgio on bass, so his first studio appearance with Death on bass, playing on this record. Phenomenal bass work. And then he had half of Cynic on here. So he had Paul Masvidal and Sean Ryder of Cynic, who are one of my favorite metal bands as well. I'll definitely do an album ranking or album reviews of theirs soon. But yeah, you had Sean Ryder on drums and Paul Masvidal on guitar. Both were like 20 years old when this came out, which is wild. But yeah, to me, the reason I have this as my number 1, to me it's the most concise and well-constructed blend of every musical style they ever had. I think it's the best mixture of brutality from the early records with the best mixture of the more introspective and melodic progressive elements of their later records after this one. And I think all of those styles come together to craft the perfect death record. In my opinion, Sean Reinert's drumming is far and away the best they ever had. He's my favorite drummer of all time, and I think just the work he does on this record, along with Cynic's Focus and their other material and Perfect Beings, I just think he's a fucking legend. Rest in peace, Sean. Rest in peace, Chuck. Paul's guitar on this album, so good. And obviously the bass, and then Chuck's work. Holy shit, dude. If you hear the demos of these songs that Chuck did with the previous Death members of the Spiritual Healing lineup, and then compare it to what we got on the original released record, it is night and day. And it is my opinion that because the members of Cynic were on here, it actually really helped take this record to a completely different level. Cynic to me is such an underlooked and essential band in the realm of metal, and they're just brilliant musicians, and I think they really inspired Chuck, and Chuck inspired them to write really cool music. So that's pretty much most of what I have to say about it, man. I think it's perfectly produced. I mean, I will say the original mix doesn't have enough bass, but the remaster is awesome, perfect. It's like the meatiest, heaviest, best sounding Death album in my opinion, maybe besides Symbolic. But yeah, overall it's fucking awesome. I mean, every song on here is a highlight. Flattening of Emotions, Suicide Machine, Together as One, Secret Face, Lack of Comprehension, See Through Dreams, Cosmic Sea, Vacant Planets, and then this one actually has a bonus track, God of Thunder, a Kiss cover, which wasn't on the original release, but I'm glad they put it on the reissue. But yeah, overall, this is my perfect Death record. It's the one that changed my life the most. It was the first metal record I ever heard full way through at 13 years old, so definitely changed my life. Yeah, so that's number one. So anyway, that took quite a while, guys. I'm sorry that fucking took 45 minutes. I probably could have done that much quicker, but you know what? I really, really love the band. I think out of all of the extreme metal bands, there was none more perfect than Death. To me, they're like the Beatles of heavy metal. They never missed. They always were innovating, always doing really cool, unique things. So, yeah, pretty much that's all I gotta say. So we go Scream, Bloody Gore, Leprosy, Spiritual Healing, Individual Thought Patterns, Sound of Perseverance, Symbolic, and Human from worst to best. That is my ranking. So anyway, let me know what you guys thought of this video. Again, I apologize for the lack of music in the background, and let me know your guys' album ranking for Death, what your thoughts on each album are, but also what other bands you'd like to see me do. And if you haven't heard of this group, I definitely urge you to check them out. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see everybody in the next review. Peace out.